A very good evening, Zimbabwe. You are listening to Studio 7 from the Voice of America on Wednesday, July 29th, 2015. And you are listening to Studio 7. I'm Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Gibbs Dube.
And of course, tonight on LiveTalk, we are talking about President Barack Obama's historic visit to Africa.
To join the discussion, phone us directly at this number, 001-202-619-2077, and we'll call you back.
And as usual, LiveTalk goes out to Zimbabwe on our 909 medium wave frequency and on the 4930, 5940 and 15460 kilohertz shortwave, Monday through Friday at 8:30 p.m.
On the internet, you can find us at www.voazimbabwe.com, www.voashona.com, and www.voindebele.com.
I have to also say that Africa's democratic progress is also at risk when leaders refuse to step aside when their terms end. Now, let me be honest with you. I do not understand this. I am in my second term. It has been an extraordinary privilege for me to serve as the President of the United States. I cannot imagine a greater honor or a more interesting job. I love my work. But under our Constitution, I cannot run again. I can't run again. I actually think I'm a pretty good president. I think if I ran, I could win. But I can't. A half-century into this independence era, it is long past time to put aside old stereotypes of an Africa forever mired in poverty and conflict. The world must recognize Africa's extraordinary progress.
Sokuleminyaka engamachumi amahlanu sekuyisikhathi sokususa isibonelo sezwekazi leAfrika njengendawo elabantu abasemuva kwezempumelelo. Abasakhulayo bakhangelelwe ukuba yibo abanengi ekuthuthukeni kwezamabhizimusi.
I have to also say that Africa's democratic progress is also at risk when leaders refuse to step aside when their terms end. Now, let me be honest with you. I do not understand this.
Nansi uno zvinorwadza kuti vatungamiriri vazhinji vemuAfrica vari kuchinja magwaro emitemo yavo apo nguva yavo yekubuda muhofisi ichinge yakwana vachida kukwikwidza zvakare. Ini ndinofarira basa rangu uye
of course, the words of President Barack Obama there. Again, thanks for joining us. You are listening to Studio 7 Live Talk. And this evening, we are talking about President Barack Obama's visit to Africa.
To join the discussion, phone us directly at this number, 001-202-619-2077. And obviously, a blessing. President Obama has called on African presidents to respect their constituencies, or maybe their constitutions, and step down when their terms end. Now, speaking in Kenya during a keynote address to the African Union, Mr. Obama actually alluded to the fact that there are some leaders who are actually overstaying in power.
Of course, that was in Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union, Gibbs. And of course, President Obama becomes the first sitting American president to address the African Union. Very symbolic indeed.
Yebo kambe Zulu kanti abalingalithola njani lamhlanje ke esixoxa ngakho uhambo lukamnumzana ke Obama. Siyakwazi ukuthi Obama uhambe khona ngale Kenya lapho uyise adabuka khona. Njalo la vele abaningi bamkhangela ukuthi khona ngale inkaba yakhe ngani yathwalwa yafa khona ngale. Siphinde zambuzo esikhona ngale ke ixoxa labantu abaningi sithi kumele ukuthi iAfrica yenze okuningi ukwenza ukuthi ithuthuke. Uthi ke okubulala iAfrica ikugwelegwele lobungana basakhanyi ukuthi bukhamba njani. kulabantu othi kungani abahambisi kuhle ezombusazwe ikakhulu nxa beyinkokheli uthi uyamangala ukuthi abantu bayahlala blessing isikhathi eside besembusweni khonaphana ukuthi angangena e-State House usefuna ukufela khona so uthi la kuyamangalisa uyabona ukuthi la lapha yena ungupresident ongani lohlonzi kodwa ngeke akwenza ngoba i-constitution yakhe ayikuvumi so uthi madoda umuntu angaqeda chapansi nikomunye chanisi
okukahambadzadiwa nhasi toda kuti tinge tichitarisa nezverwendo rwavaobama kuafrica vakakwanisawo kuenda kukenya kunova kwakazvarirwa baba vavo vachibvako vachienda kuethiopia kune muzinda weafrican union vachitaura kuvatungamiri vemuafrica nevamwe vanhu vose vemuafrica vaobama vakataura ivo kuaddis ababa kuethiopia ikoko kuti vatungamiri venyika havafaniri kuita chipikiri charambira pamadziro chekuti Gibbs kana uchida kubvisa chipikiri ichocho mudhuri wese unodonda
uzuvone konapo
ukaona uri mutungamiri wenyika uchiti inini ndikabva nyika yaenda kumawere zvinoreva kuti uri kutadza kutonga ndo dzimwe nyaya dzavakataura
kakulu nxa ukhangela-ke khonokho akukhulume ngokuthi abantu abafuna ukuhamba abantu abaningi ezimbabwe bathi babona ngani kade khombe khonale kule zimbabwe yabona ngoba siyakwazi ukuthi umongameli sehlala isikhathi eside khona ngale e-State House so maybe bekhuluma ngayo sikwazi
of course Mr. Mugabe was not in attendance and there was also in Africa US summit that Mr. Mugabe was also not invited to. Of course there are targeted sanctions against President Robert Mugabe's government by the United States of America for alleged human rights abuses. But of course, the Mugabe government dismisses the allegation of human rights, saying that, well, it's because of the land reform program that the government embarked on in 2000. As a result, there were sanctions that were placed on Harare. I think, Gibbs, we have our first guest. That is Mr. Clifford Mashiri, a former Zimbabwe diplomat to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He's now based in the UK. Mr. Mashiri, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you so much for joining us. Gibbs, you can start the ball rolling.
Thank you, Mr. Mashiri, for joining us. So tell us a bit about what you heard from Mr. Obama. We know that he went to Kenya and was in Ethiopia too. But there was something of interest when he talked about, leaders that don't want to, that want to stick to power, for good.
Yes, that's quite right. President Obama, indicated that nobody should be a president for life, and that your country is better off if you have new blood and you have new ideas. And also he indicated that he himself is still young, and he would still want to step aside and enjoy, his time in retirement when he's still young. And he was encouraging other leaders to do the same. He did not understand why people stay long or stay so long, especially when they've got a lot of money. And in this case, there is speculation that this was directed at leaders, including Mr. Mugabe. He is a long-term leader, and there is speculation also that he might stand for another term in 2018, whereby this would see him relinquishing power at the age of 99. Just unbelievable. So President Obama urged African Union leaders to oppose those kinds of tendencies and to stick to their constitutions.
So, but at the end of the day, it's a call. And do you think that people actually listen whenever a leader like Obama says some of these things?
Oh, definitely people listen, starting with the audience. He had several standing ovations, and including, as I observed on television, from civil society participants who were, upstairs. They kept, urging him to speak, by showing that respect in terms of ovations. And I want to believe also the other leaders, other heads of state, take a cue. We don't necessarily have dictators throughout Africa. Some African leaders have, respected their constitutions, and he mentioned that, in particular, President Mandela. and so on. So, yes, now that he's speaking, though, after Mandela, there are many leaders who must have taken cue of what he was saying.
Tombotaura nechivanhu pakabatwa apa nyaya yekutengeserana pakati peAmerica nenyika dzemaAfrica vaObama vachitaura ivo kuti hazvina kunaka kuti vanhu vangopiwe zvinhu zvekuti vanobva vadya ipapo kana kuti aid, asi kuti panofanira kunge pachitengeseranwa. Munoona sei ukama hweZimbabwe, munoona sei ukama hweAmerica nedzimwe nyika dzemuAfrica, vamwe kavanenge vakuti China yaenda nenyika?
Hongu China iri kubvuta mamarket akawanda muAfrica, asi America iri kuedzawo kuita zvakanaka kuti ikuridzire ukama hwakanaka nenyika idzodzo dzemuAfrica. China yagara iri isingasarudze shamwari, inongoti hurumende inotonga kana yakaponda vanhu, kana yakasarudzwa zvakanaka inongoti ngatiite business. Ndokusiyana kwayakaita neAmerica. America inotanga yatarisisa kuti hurumende iyi yakasarudzwa zvakanaka, haiponde vanhu, saka ndo zvinosiyana izvozvo. Asi pakutengeserana, America inotengeserana neZimbabwe pane zvimwe zvakati wandei, inobatsira zvekare Zimbabwe padevelopment in terms of humanitarian assistance, asi zvisiri zviye zvegovernment to government kwete.
Of course, I had asked Mr. Mashira about President Obama's comments that the rest of the world also needed to change its approach to Africa by boosting fair trade and not just providing aid handouts. And of course, Mr. Obama vowed that the United States stood with the region to defeat terrorism and end conflict. Those are some of the issues that we'll be tackling. Of course, Mr. Mashiri is saying, of course, it's true that China's trade with Africa is high at the moment. I mean, compared to the United States. But of course, he's taking a swipe at Beijing for trading with countries irrespective of their human rights record.
Yes, we know that China is in Angola, where there's a lot of oil there. So it's actually targeting some of these countries with lots of oil. Sudan is another country. And we're told that recently they sent some, or maybe they're intending to send troops to Sudan, you know.
Interesting. Tinai mutereri wedu ari kuBotswana, mukoma Vitalis makadi.
Ndinofara mukoma, munofara sei?
Aiwa, isu tiri nani zvemutova, kumwe wakaoma kumwe munyoro.
Tiri kuna kuBotswana kwatinoshungurudza zvehelicopter zvinenge zvichitsvaga matinenge tichiwaka dzimba.
Hadzi zvaita sei kuBotswana?
Botswana uku kana anga ari mazuva eholiday, zvikopo-kopo zvinenge zviri mudenga zvichimhanyisa mapurisa nepasi nedzimotikari zvekutoti hakumabasa kwachona hakuendeki.
Kwaberekera ingwe?
Kune vaberekera mutogara mudzimba mosiya zvakadaro moti kana holiday yachona yapera mochizotanga kufamba.
Aiwa, zvinenge zvisina kumira zvakanaka. Asi munoona sei rwendo rwavaObama kuAfrica?
Ndiyo nyaya chaichaya, ndiyo nyaya inonzi nyaya chaichaya yakataura vaObama iyi. Munorangarira vakuru pavanoti kazi kunonzi kubaya bebe nemukanwa. Ndiko kwakaita vaObama ikoko. Mutemo unonge uchiti munhu at 60 years ngaaresign. Asi ona kuti munhu ane 65 kusvika pa90 chakadaro years ari kungoramba ari pabasa asaumwe ari kuresign. Ona kuti munhu iye kana kuri kuti kuenda kuchikora pane kumwe kudzidza kwakuti munhu akadzidza but anenge asina kudzidza zvekutonga akadzidza zvemabhuku. Asi zvekuti atonge manje nokuziva kuti zviri kuda vanhu panenge pasina chikoro ipapo. Nekuti iko zvezvo uri kuona kuti kune operation vharai makambani. Kwavo kuita zvekare operation hatishade mavhenda mutaundi. Operation vharai zvikoro, maticha akudzinga muzvikoro sekuverenga kwamaita panyuzo. Izvo zvichitongokwara operation vharai mashopu. Saka uona kuti horaiti tikadaro so hakusi kugona kutonga ikoko.
Saka muri kutenderana nemashoko avaObama? Hallo? Mukoma Vitalis, foni yavo inenge iri kuti netsei, asi tinenge tanzwa zvavari kutaura. Vari kuti ivo vatungamiri or he's essentially saying that leaders must have term limits. It's not healthy for any country to have a leader who stays for decades and decades. Gibbs.
Ye uyakhuluma lapha ke umnumzana uthi hayi ke nxa umuntu angangena esikhundleni phela khumbula ukuthi kulabanye abakhangele khona ngaluthi bangangena nxa ukuthi umuntu angangena ke esikhundleni angacabanga ukuthi nguye yedwa angahlala sephakathi khona ngale. So Mr. Mashiri, is there any way that maybe some leaders were listening to Mr. Obama's speech?
Yes, I want to believe leaders were listening. Those in the chamber he was addressing, they were paying attention and also clapping hands and showing appreciation of what he was saying. I also want to believe that the diplomats who were in attendance took the message home of what President Obama was saying. And I was also impressed by the President of Ethiopia, or Prime Minister of Ethiopia, whose government also has been criticized for human rights abuses. Yeah, he did show quite a relaxation and appreciation of what President Obama was saying. And President Obama made sure that he commented on some of his meetings with some of these heads of state, including the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, where he was urging that they should respect human rights and not to jail, journalists and so on. So I think leaders, heads of state and government who were in attendance listened, and those who were at home maybe paid attention, with the exception probably of Mr. Mugabe only and a few others.
Yeah, but interestingly, in June, also addressing a session of the African Union in Sandton in South Africa, this is what Mr. Mugabe said, and he said, and I quote, we in Africa put a rope around our own neck and say leaders must only have 2 terms. It is a democracy. If people want a leader to continue, let him continue. These are the words of Mr. Mugabe. Anything wrong with this?
Oh, there is something seriously wrong. There he was saying, indirectly urging Nkurunziza of Burundi to go ahead with his unpopular, third term in violation of the Burundi constitution. So, in other words, Mugabe was trying to bless something that is evil and should never, ever be encouraged at all. That of going against, 2 terms and violating constitutions.
Gibbs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mashiri, and stay on the line. Silo mnumzana ke uPrince Ncube lapha ecingweni blessing. Baba Ncube ungatshona njani?
Tshona njani la?
Sitshone kakhulu ngaphi khonapho Baba Ncube?
Johannesburg.
Ye kunjani eGoli?
Hayi ungcono njana.
Ye uzwile ke amazwi kaMnumzana Obama ungathini?
Hayi ngiyozwile amazwi kaObama ukuthi ngani uyazibona indubo ezenzakala la eAfrika ukuthi amazwe onke landele amalungelo abantu ukuthi asikwazi ukuthi yena nganika sizobani lapho ukuthi ekwazi ukuthi inkokheli zilandele amalungelo abantu. Asikwazi ukuthi yena uphethe ngaba lo mbono onjani ukuthi ekwazi ukuxozelela indubo esifana nalezo.
So kodwa ngombono wakho ezekhulume sithi kulabantu abafuna ukufela esikhundleni ubona ngani bekhuluma ngabo bani khona?
Hayi ke lokho kusobala kakhulu ngoba kuyaziwa ke Africa yonke ukuthi bakhona vele abanjalo. Lo bengasakuvezanga nje straight ukuthi besitsho bani kodwa akho vele ubeqinisile.
Ubona ngani bangaki eAfrica abayala ukuhamba? Bane kanganani?
Bona abaningi laloba bengabe abanye bephuma kodwa bayatshintshana kungani ama-parties angikhona engafuni ukuthi iphume yonke yona leyo party ubusenye but afuna ukuphuma iphathi yonke ngcono betshintshana kodwa iphathi ingaphumi but ilizwe layo lokho lisifa lisiyaphambili ezilongo ungatshintshanga yona iphathi.
Yes, siyakuzwa kakhulu ke Mnumzana Prince Ncube khona ngapho ke eJohannesburg ungadinwa la kusasa baba. Yes, so Mr. Ngube is saying that obviously there are so many leaders in Africa that are, staying for a long time in power. So he says this is very worrying indeed.
Of course, we are trying to get our second guest, Salino Mlambo, but unfortunately, we are having problems with her phone. But again, we'll try to call her so that we can bring her on board to talk about President Obama's historic visit to Africa. Tine mwe mtereri wedu ari parunhare mukoma Philemon, makadi mukoma Philemon vari South Africa. Aiwa, isu taswera hedu mukoma Philemon, nyaya iri mudariro mainzwa iyi muri kuona sei rwendo rwavaobama uri?
Vambofandora mafambiro avo vaita mushe kuti vagone kuti batsirawo zvinhu zviri kuitika namaleaders edu emuafrica avo, nokuti havadi kubva muzvigaro nyika iri kuparara.
Asi kavanenge vachiti mukoma Philemon vanhu vari kuvavhotera, ko chii chaipa?
Hadi kufanana nekunyika yokwedu yokuzimbabwe hakuzivi zvokuvhotera kungopiridzira maelection.
Saka muri kuti hapana kuvhota nekuti vamwe vanenge vava kuti ko vaobama vanodei pamuchato wedhongi nebere?
Vaobama ndivo vanotamure kuti vataure nokuti kunze kwavo vanhu angadawa papadhi kuti haisi kudawa zvinhu zvepadhi.
Aiwa, tinotenda zvikuru mukoma Philemon.
Okay, maita mucho.
All right, nekuti foni yenyu inenge yanga yakumboti kate mchana.
Maybe network.
Handiti aiwa, asi tinotenda tanzwa pfungwa dzenyu. Of course, Philemon is praising Mr. Obama, saying he's the only one who can bite the bullet because he does not see African leaders doing what they agreed under the AU. That is the issue of the peer review mechanism that was promoted by then South African President Thabo Mbeki. He's saying they don't do that, So he's saying kudos to President Obama for, telling leaders that they should live, as they say, if there's a saying of politicians, right, that politicians are like diapers. Yes, they need constant changing, and both for the same reason.
Exactly. So now, when you talk about the peer review mechanism, I think we are referring definitely to NEPAD, eh?
Yes.
We don't know what happened to that,
Indeed.
Some leaders were totally uncomfortable about NEPAD. So right now we're joined by Miss Sally Nobuhle Mlambo of the Platform for Youth Development. She's in Bulawayo, I guess. Miss Nobuhle Mlambo, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Are you in Bulawayo?
Yes, I'm in Bulawayo currently.
Okay, thank you very much. So what can you say about Mr. Obama's kind of remarks about leaders who do not want to let go some power,
I think his remarks, like the previous speaker was saying, I think they're courageous remarks because as Africans ourselves, we have failed to address the issue of leaders who are failing to give power or ceding power to someone else. But him, maybe as an outsider, it has been much, much easier for him to come and address the issue of possession of power from one leader to the next. So I think it has been good, the fact that he's actually bringing it out in the open where the leaders themselves were gathered in a way that he shows them that the world is watching and everyone is unhappy about the way things have been taking part in Africa, really. So I think it was very courageous and it has been good. It's been good.
Yeah, kodwa nasubona ngesindebele sibili khonapho ubona indaba abakokheli bangafuna ukuhamba befuna ukuhlala esikhundleni umuntu aguge azephelele khona kwenziwa kweni khona.
Indaba le ukuthi umuntu azofuna ukuphela esikhundleni indaba yokuthi lapha umphakathi weAfrica kule ngingathi kule system yokuthi abantu balomkhuba wokuthi bengangena esikhundleni bafuna ukube belokhe bephila. So indaba yokuthi nxa usesikhundleni uyakwanisa ukuthi ube usidla udeplete ama-resources ngoba uyabe ule-access kulokuthi nxa ungumuntu nje ongela control ongakwanisi ukuthi ebambelele ama-resources wona la kugcina sokusiba nzima so nxa wena ungumuntu osesikhundleni yabe ule-influence kakhulu yokuthi ukwanise ukucontrol ama-resources wona la nxa usesikhundleni ungakwanisa ukudla uzudiniwe ngongafuni ukudla so ngenxa yokuthi umuntu yena ngokwakhe izimo engadla kakhulu kangakanani yena ngokwakhe umuntu kasuthi so bafuna ukube belokhe besidla bodwa belokhe besidla yikho bengafuna ukuthi besuke esikhundleni.
Siyawuzwa kakhulu ungayikatshana mama. So according to Miss Mlambo, you know, leaders don't want to live because they'll be getting a lot of wealth, you know. If you become wealthy, you can't live. Yeah.
Of course, an interesting subject indeed. Reminds me of that story. You know, one African leader was asked, if you die today, where do you want to be buried?
State House.
He said, no, not State House. He said Jerusalem. And they said, why? He said, so that after 3 days I'll resurrect and go back to State House. Tinemwe mtereri wedu, vamakuni, magadi vamakuni.
Ndakasimba blessing makabi ku state.
Aiwa tiri nani kana mchinge mafona sova makuni muri pa mai central apa tunobva tanzwa manyukunyuku.
Handitika.
Tiudzewo pfungwa dzenyu munoona serwedo rwaObama nemashoko avo.
Mashoko aya akakora akasimbisisa chaizvo. But ndoda kuti nditini dambudziko ratinaro nderekuti takaenda kuhondo tikarwisa utongi hweudzanyiriri tichida yatinoti 1 man 1 vote. 1 man 1 vote yapo haifanirwi kusenza kune mumwe munhu, tinofanirwa kungovhotera munhu mumwe chete. Dambudziko rataanaro yezvinezvi even vanhu veAfrican Union ivava dzimwe dzenguva pachanetsa chaizvo kuti uchairmanship hwacho huende kune mumwe anofanirwa kuhutora because once hwamharapo hwamharapa. Handifunge kuti munhu angabvume kuti azotambidza kune mumwe munhu because nyaya yapopo ndeyekuti chabaya chikatyokera. Unoona kuti ukanga watenga bhutsu nyowani, bhutsu ikange chibhendera kusiriko kwakabhendera tsoka yako, bhutsu iyoyo emu yayo ndeyekukuremadza, saka zviri nani kuti uirase. Hazviti muri kubona. Saka bhutsu ukaona yapeyamira rutivi rusiriro rwakapeyamira tsoka yako, shangu iyoyo isinoti worth itoirasa zvako iri nyowani nokuti ichakuremadza zvekuzogara pawheelchair. Saka ndonyaya iri kutoitika. Ndongoti magroups emuAfrica naSADC and so on vari kugadza utungamiriri hwemagrupu iwaya pandinofungidzira kuti ibhutsu iri kubhendera kune rimwe divi risiro rakabhendera tsoka, saka ichavaremadza.
Aiwa, tinotenda zvikuru vamakuni
rangu because kana iwewe uchitadza kurespecta chinhu chawakarwira kuti chive in place like a constitution yevanhu vese vepano pasi ichitaura kuti 2 terms zvakwana, iwe wotaura kuti no ndoda kuti ndiextend. Don't you feel sorry kuti vamwe ava vanodawo kuti vaenjoye keke iyoyo, pisi yekeke iyoyo, iwe chete nemhuri yako ndiwe unoda kuti urambe uri pachigaro. Tikatarisa matungamiriri vacho makore avagara pazvigaro izvozvi about 5 to 6 years dzavo ukakalkuleta zvakanaka uchaona kuti vakanga vari muchadenga mundege vachiri pano pasi because that's what they enjoy most.
Aiwa, tinotenda zvikuru vamakuni nekupinda muchirongwa chedu.
Ndatenda.
Tinotenda. Of course, Mr. Makuni is slamming the leaders who want to stay beyond their term limits. Fortunately for our radio listeners, it ends here. But the good news is we are streaming live. So go to www.voazimbabwe.com. Mr. Mashiri, stay online or stay on the line, and also Miss Sally Mlambo, please do stay on the line.
Yeah, lo mkandandi baba ubambe khona apha ecingweni ungayikatshana siyabuya sesixoxa lawe. This is Gibbs Dube in Washington DC. Stay tuned.
those of you who are just joining us, good evening. And this is Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about President Barack Obama's historic visit to Africa. Of course, Mr. Obama went to Kenya, and later on he traveled to the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where he became the first United States president to address the African Union. Of course, he touched on a number of issues in his address, including some African leaders who do not want to stay for only 2 terms. Many, he said, tend to change the constitution so that they can go beyond the term limits, something that he strongly condemned. Of course, he also touched on the issue of trade between the United States of America and Africa. He also talked about the issue of terrorism because countries like Somalia, Kenya, Nigeria, there are these extremist groups like Al-Shabaab and, of course, Boko Haram that are causing havoc, issues that Mr. Obama said Washington and Africa must put their heads together and address. Gibbs.
And Mr. Obama also touched the issue of educating women and health care. He also touched the issue of supporting young girls who are affected by HIV/AIDS in 10 countries, including Zimbabwe. Now, our guests today are Miss Sally Mlambo, who is at the Platform for Youth Development, and Mr. Clifford Mashiri, who is a political analyst. Ye lapha ke cingweni zulukandaba kade silo mnumzana uMakandani kumbe lapha kubhale Mukandani. Qale sizuzibiza ukuthi yilo igama ngubani baba?
Mina igama ngumkandani baba ngumtholi.
Ye Mukandani kunjani Mukandani?
Hayi ngiphilile futhi kunjani?
Hayi kakhulu kunjani lapho khona?
Hayi kungcono lapha eGoli.
Ye so akusitshele ungathini ngalokhu okunyenge umnumzana Obama?
Obama uyihlabe kanye uthiwa uyihlabe ekhaleni. Isindebele. Ubona into ehluphayo mina kakhulu ngiyakhuluma ngowethu upresident kakhulu ngingajihaji. Umkhulu wethu ngabe uphumile kudala, kodwa because umkhulu wethu usathanda into zamahala nokwesaba into zamacala awenzayo, angeke avume ukuphuma. Ngiyakhumbula ngo-1982 umkhulu wethu esola ukhamuzi ubhanda yena walela esikhundleni, abantu kabasamfuni, kodwa yena lokhu esalela esikhundleni. Why? Emblema esehla e-airport. Namhlanje yena nguye sesenza into efanayo. Ngomnyaka we-election ulamaqhinga awenzayo ukuthi ufuna ukwenza lokho ayenze lokho. Ngakubalela but isikhathi ngiyakwazi asikho ukuthi ngo-1985 wenzeni. Ngo-1985 ngakhumbula ukuthi ugijimisa uJoshua Nkomo ngo-84 83. Ngo-1990 ungakhumbula futhi ukuthi wenzeni, wathuma uBhanana ukuthi abize uNkomo babambane kwabantu bakulandela. Ngo-1995 wayenza futhi into efana ukuthi hayi asenzeni i-ASAP ukuthi abantu bonke babe lamabhizinisi. Uyazibona ngamaqhinga wonke lawa awenzayo ukuthi abelokhu ehlele esikhundleni. Ngo-2000 wachaya abelungu wakaxotsha into yonke kufuneka ngomnyaka sonke siloqeda siyabona. So yikho wakukhulumayo ubaba nguyedwa sesele usefika nama-president 5 or 4 per country. Ama-president aseyingenile ngelizwe alisana angiyedwa sesele. Yinto ehlula ubaba ukuthi ngamahala ukuhlala mahala, kathengi ukudla, kathengi isigqoko, kathengi amacala okubulala amandebele. Yinto eyenza umkhulu wethu ahlale esikhundleni. Ukuthi kuningi engubhala phansi engunanzelelwe ngomkhulu wethu, kodwa isikhathi sethu ngiyakwazi ukuthi asinike singivumele ukuthi ngikhulume okuningi. Mina ngubalile ngakubhala phansi konke ukuthi alibona kuthiwa ziyafonelwa, ngifonela nje noma emini ngalichasisela kahle. Ubaba ugane kakhulu.
Uyijayekhaleni sibili and uyakhuluma lokuthi isikhathi singani sigavuniwe lapha. Yes yakuzwa baba, kodwa ke sibongile ukuthi ungenele ehlelweni baba Mtholi khona ngapho ke eJohannesburg. Ungathina lokusasa baba.
Ngiyabonga baba.
That's right. So Mr. Mtholi is raising a lot of issues here. He says Mr. Obama got it very, very right, you know, when he mentioned this issue of leaders who are overstaying in power. And he says President Robert Mugabe is one of those who have overstayed in power. He's counting 35 years and plus, saying, no, this is too much. He says the reason why he doesn't want to leave is because he wants to have free meals every time, get free suits and so forth from the public. And he says at the same time, Mr. Mugabe once condemned Kamuzu Hastings Banda of Malawi, when he came to Zimbabwe. He said, Mr. Banda, it's time for you to leave. And I think 5 years later, Mr. Banda was out. So he says the president has been doing a lot of things since independence, the persecution of Joshua Nkomo, coming out with things like ESAP, the killings in Material and in the Midlands, and, all those kind of programs. But he says he has taken too much time in power.
Of course, one of the issues that Mr. Obama tackled is the issue of corruption, which he likened to cancer. Let's talk about corruption in Africa, Mr. Bashir.
Yes, sir. Well, corruption, indeed, President Obama did talk about it. He acknowledged that corruption is worldwide, and he also admitted that even in the United States there is corruption, but the important thing about it is they are fighting it, and they always want to review and renew their governance practices in their country, which is what he encouraged other countries to do, to investigate and, eradicate corruption. So when we talk of how widespread corruption is in Africa, sure, there is a lot of corruption in Africa. The leaders who are remaining in power for too long, most of them are accused of corruption. More specifically, Mr. Mugabe. And if we look at a birthday party for his wife, which netted about $5 million US, just one occasion, one day, people being asked to pay money to come and sit at her birthday party in her house. Some of the ministers failing to pay that $2,000, $2,000, and if they managed, they said somewhere in the periphery, those who had enough money had to pay as much as 5,000, or the table costing 50,000 US. That is an example of corruption, selling a birthday of a head of state or a wife of a head of state when it's supposed to be a public occasion, when people should celebrate and, wish the First Lady a good life. But, it's now being used for purposes of, amassing wealth. So that's one example of corruption.
But of course, here I have to get angry on behalf of the First Lady and say, today she came out and said the money was for charity, not for personal purposes. Unfortunately, she's not here to defend herself. So Attorney Zulu Gibbs had to come in. Regai titore mumtereri. Vamafira kureva makadi.
Akasimbere.
Aiwa isu tiri nani kuri sei ikoko?
Tiri nani zvako.
Muri kuona sei rwendo rwaObama uru?
Ya irwendo rwakanaka fani, ende vataura chokwadi chekuti vatungamiriri venyika havafaniri kuisa hovo mumastate house. Munhu anofanira kuita time yekutonga.
Asika vamwe vanoti ko kana vanhu vachiri kukuda ungaudzwe here neAmerica kuti chibva pachigaro.
Aiwa, kaconstitution, ngatitedzere constitution yenyika kwete yeparty. Unogona kudiwa neparty but nyika isi kuchakuda.
Asika vanhu ndimi munovhota.
Vanhu vanovhota but pane ma-intimidations anenge aripo.
Kwete kuti vanenge vadyiwa ndo vanoti ewe hanzi kadi ndingwe rinonaka richakweva rimwe kana iroro kweva roti mavarangu azarevhu.
Aiwa, hakuna zvakadaro. Munhu unofanira kuita nguva yekutonga wosiyira vamwe 5 years term woregedza pouya mumwe, kozi ndokuti ikonomi yenyika igare yakanaka. Mukada kuona nyika dzakabudirira kuchinjana kutungamiriri.
Saka nyaya yeutungamiri ndo yamanya. Ko nyaya dzekudyidzana nekutengeserana idzi?
Nyaya dzekuti dzatotoafekta zvakasimbarara. Mukada kuona kuti mutungamiriri wenyika atadza kuenda kumitingi yekuchinya kwauya waobama and we know kuti nyika ma-european countries ndiwo ane mari and ari kutadza kuatenda sachairman weau atadza kuenda kuatenda ipopopo inye mapersonal zvake iye but atadza kuenda zvinoite kuita nenyika nekuda kwacho
asi kaivo vari kuti aiwa nyaya yekuti hapana kuwirirana nezvirango haisi yekuti iyo inyaya yekuti muzimbabwe muri kutyorwa kodzero dzevanhu asi kuti inyaya yeminda.
Aiwa ko minda yacho yakatorwa zvakanaka here tingabva tarowa chiti zvona kana makudo achirowa achibviswa munda akomana handiti anonzi sva obuda munda here anopiwa time ka ungabva watanga nekukomba nekuuraya mhuka dzese.
Aiwa tinotenda zvikuru comrade mafira kureva.
Ma-human rights aiwa achasangana nawo.
Aiwa tinotenda zvikuru nekupinda muchirongwa chedu.
Aiwa maita basa.
Of course, Comrade Mafira Kureva is also saying that leaders must have term limits, so that you know the economy can improve. You know, when there are people coming in with new ideas, and of course, I asked him a question about the issue of sanctions. Because the government says the sanctions were imposed on Harare simply because of the land reform program. And he said, no, the other problem was that the land reform program itself was chaotic. And he gave an example of baboons. If you are chasing them off your field, he says you also give them time, you know? So, hey, shouting like that. And then, you know, just go in the field and kill them, you know, using guns and whatever, bullets, whatever, you know. So he says you also give them time to move out of the field.
Talking about these animals, you know, remind me of the lion.
Cecil the lion, of course. The country's most famous and iconic lion, a story that is trending the world over.
Yeah, and some people have appeared in court, you know, facing charges of, endangering animals.
Indeed.
So now let's get back to you, Miss Mlambo. Are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm good.
Now, yes, we don't want to seem to be undermining some other things or issues that were raised by Mr. Obama. And one of those was to do with HIV, AIDS. He said he was committing himself to, fighting against this kind of disease. And at the same time, he said it was important for women to have this kind of good health care and education. What is your take on that?
On the issue of HIV and AIDS, I think we enjoy by talking about HIV and AIDS because you would expect that after all these years, it's an issue. But you find that even now, 30 years later, it's still an issue. So, they are committed to fight HIV and AIDS. I think it's a very good initiative because as the U.S. as the most powerful state in the world, resources and financial capacity to support research and who have been infected and affected by HIV. Then on the issue of education, yamankazana labo mama, it's because we are not during Africa who observe something. It is lacking in the sense of women and girls are being left out in many decision making, and they are the ones who are most affected. Issue HIV and AIDS. Omama ibabagcinayo isigulane nxa usually kungaba lokuthi kungaba nama-orphans abafelakazi and so forth. Omama are usually the ones aba-affected bakhona. So uyabona ukuthi at the end i-load ukuthi i-HIV and AIDS i-affecte omama the most lamankazana ukwedlula even bona obaba kumbe ukuthi singathi abafana. And ungakhangela the rate of infection ikakhulu especially kumankazana amancane, and ufuna uzibuza ukuthi why is it that abantu amankazana amancane yibo aba-affected kakhulu. It's because maybe kaningi mina I would like to believe ukuthi kule issue of abuse, kule issue of poverty yokuthi nxa wena uyinkazana usually you find ukuthi ngole pressure yokuthi ubonakale uprovide kakhulu. So at the end amankazana babona ingathi kungcono ukuthi bethengise ingxenye imizimba yabo ba-compromise vele bona ngokwabo and bona omama ngabantu aba-vulnerable. So it's important ukuthi bebonakale be-protected. So I think initiative yakhe yokuthi America is going to support the program HIV and AIDS labo mama, I think it's a very good one.
So Ms. Nobutle Mlambo is actually praising Obama, Mr. Obama, for actually assuring many nations that you fight against HIV/AIDS, you'll fight for the protection of women. And she's saying that women and girls are always vulnerable to any kind of abuse. In any situation, when there's hunger, when there's war, when there's chaos, usually women are affected. And she went further to talk about the abuse of women generally, even in the home, in the homes. She says they need protection, and if Obama is talking about it, it's so good.
On the issue of women's rights, Mr. Mashiri, if you can just come in, any improvements in Africa?
Right, improvements are still necessary. They are still needed. I found, or rather, I listened to President Obama on that issue where he was condemning the use of rape as a weapon of war. It's a very important issue that he raised, particularly in the unstable regimes. He mentioned some places where there is still, this kind of instability, like in South Sudan. I'm not saying that he said that's where there is a rape as a weapon of war, but the wars being fought in all these countries, they provide opportunities for the use of rape as a weapon in fighting a war, punishing the opponents, rivals, enemies, humiliating and embarrassing them by raping their women or so. He also talked about ensuring that women are not forced into marriage, like young children aged 9, 10, 11. He deplored that practice. He encouraged African countries to change this practice of sticking to their old traditions, particularly the negative ones, those customs of forced marriages and also mutilation. He criticized all that. So here we need also to support our women in Africa, to ensure they have good health. And he urged, for ensuring that the position of women is improved in society.
Thank you so much. We also have Facebook messages and, of course, messages on WhatsApp. First, on WhatsApp, we have Harrison, who says, as a patriot, I believe that Mr. Obama is not fit to address human rights issues. How can someone say he or she supports democracy like that, leading a country which is full of people who are racist like Rhodes? A white policeman shot a black man recently, sometime last year. This was addressed in favor of the white police officer. And Joseph says on the point, but what is wrong with African minds? Why should we be reminded by other people what is right and wrong? Uraya says, we salute Barack Obama, human rights. We need human rights. We also need our independence in Africa. We should get our rights. Gibbs.
And then on Facebook, we've got a message from Mr. Mongameli, who says, Mr. Obama should actually visit Zimbabwe. We yearn for you there. And then there's another message from Philemon Yoni, who writes, I agree with Mr. President because most African leaders do not accept any chance given to them for them to live, especially President Robert Mugabe. So I've got those two messages and three messages that are coming in right now. They are from people who want us to phone them. So ke sibuyele kuwe mama khona ngapho Mlambo usaconnecte ngani mama? Yes, ichaya ngesilungu kade sikenza kubuza ngesikhiwo ukuthi now according to what Mr. Obama is saying, you know, the protection of young girls is actually important. But at the end of the day, do you think that the money that is usually targeted for these young people goes to them or is abused or something like that?
That money is usually abused because there are very few genuine people who want to channel that money into helping young girls or young people to upgrade themselves. The issue being that people can get that money, but like you were talking earlier on, because of due to issues of corruption, people are not willing to eliminate a problem that keeps on giving them money. So it becomes a vicious cycle that the more the problem stays, the longer it's there, the more money that people are going to get. And, you know, the more, if you address the problem as well, then there won't be any victims for other people to use, you know. Because if you look at young girls, I think that the worst affected people in any society in Africa currently, in fact in any part of the world, because firstly, like I had highlighted earlier on, they are vulnerable, they are not good decision makers, and they're easy to lure into doing bad things. So people enjoy that vicious cycle to be there so that they keep on taking advantage. However, if that money comes, very few people or organizations are really willing to put that money into good use, to use it for the specific reason that it's supposed to be used for. However, they usually channel it into getting fancy laptops, fancy cars, fancy office space, that sort of thing. And it's not being used for entirely that purpose only. So I've got mixed feelings there. Yes, there are some people who are genuine in towards the cause of fighting for the girl child, but I would like to believe that the majority, they are not genuine, but they are just writing proposals because they know that that is the easiest way of getting money into their organizations or into their government, they say. So no, it won't be used adequately. It won't be used the way that it's supposed to be used. I don't know what sort of structures can be made or can be created to encourage transparency, you know, and accountability to make sure that that money is channeled towards the causes of the young girls or women in general.
Thank you very much, and stay on the line.
Todzoka kwamuri vamashiri tichitarisawo nezverwendo irworwo, munoona pane chinozobuda here panyaya dzekudyidzana pakati penyika izodzi dzemuafrica neamerica kana pachiitwa nzendo dzakadai?
Kana pachiitwa nzendo dzakaita saidzodzi dzinosanganisa kufamba kwavaobama vachienda kuafrican union, panobuda zvakanaka kwazvo zvinoratidza kuti pane tariro pamberi apa zvinokurudzira ukama pakati peamerica neafrica. Pane nyika dzakawanda dzemuafrica dzinoona ukama neamerica huri hunokosha chose. Hadzisi dzese nyika dzine makakatanwa neamerica sezvatinoona zvichiitwa nezimbabwe nedzimwe shoma. Saka zvinotarira kuti ukama hweafrica huchanaka chose. Dzimwe nyika dzichatorawo mazano akapiwa navaobama zvichiratidza kuti vachatonga zvakanaka munyika dzavo sezvavakakurudzirwa kuita ma2 term muoffice vachiteredzera maconstitution avo.
Gibbs.
Yes, kweke khonapha nkosazana Mlambo. So ke ubona ngazani ke kumele kwenziweni nxa ukuthi amazwi kaMnumzana Obama alandelwe. Sikhangela khonokho ukuthi uthi kugcwele uyazi khonokho kuthiwa ukugila imkhuba eState House lapha kuzobuya lapha abangafuna ukuphuma, kuzobuya njalo lokuthi kukhangelwe okuhambelana labo mama. Kambe kungenziwani khonapho ngembono yakho khonapho?
Umbono wami ukubuya kaMnumzana Obama bekukuhle sibili lokuthi ukhulumile sibili ngokuthi nxa umuntu isikhathi sakhe sesiphelile umele esuke esihlaleni. But mina umbono wami nxa ungoweqiniso ngibona ingathi impendulo iyuthi thina abase-Afrika ngoba thina ayisendaba yokuthi singatshelwa nguye ukuthi hayi lapha akumanga kuhle lapha kunjani njani thina ngawethu siyakwazi kodwa indaba ekhona yikuthi thina sizayenza njani ukuthi sitshintshe izinto umumo wala ngenxa yokuthi yena ubuyile sibili ukhulumile phambi kwabantu e-Ethiopia e-Addis Ababa wakhuluma sibili okuzwakalayo ukuthi hayi indaba inje kodwa ukuthi nxa sifuna ukukhangelisisa ngeqiniso akula lutho olutsha alukhulumileyo ukhuluma indaba sibili ezokuthi ama-human rights activists bathona bakhuluma ngazo so kukuthi thina abantu abahlala lapha e-Afrika ukuthi sifuna ukwenzani ngomumo ola ngoba indaba le ayikhulumileyo hayi sonke siyayazi thina ilizwe lethu singathi yithi example yokuthi abantu for the past 20 years siyakwazi ukuthi umuntu kumele ehambe and lathi sesibona ingathi kunormal ukuthi elokhe khona kathe sikwenzakaleli laseBurundi futhi kodwa kwamanye amazwe lapha e-Afrika singakhangela ukuthi o-South Africa maybe as an example nxa into enjalo ingazama ukwenzakala bona bayenzani so kube kuyikuthi thina sihlanganise amakhanda njengabantu bala sibone ukuthi nxa into i-wrong thina we should be able ukuthi siphakame sikhulume ukuthi into le imbi nxa i-constitution yethu isithi umuntu kabuse kabili kumele siyenze khona lokho nxa umuntu esefuna ukubusa wesithathu lathi sibona ngale sibili sesiphakamisa amakhanda sithi hayi nxa thina sisithi kubili ungabusa okubili sokwanele yinto esimele siyenze ngoba nxa sizabe silokhe sibona singenzi lutho akusincedi ngoba kathesi ingxenye yenu uObama ubuyile ukhulumile kuzabuya omunye futhi uzakhuluma futhi into efanayo uzakhuluma ngokuthi abantu nxa amathena amabili asephelile step down kule corruption kule security issues kulezinto eziningi azikhulumileyo kodwa indaba esizaziyo thina ngokwethu so kusho ukuthi thina siphakamise amakhanda kusho ukuthi thina sibone silelizwi lokuthi sikhulume ukuthi kuyenziweni ukwenzela ukuthi thina mbona ngathi ukuthi inkululeko i-Egypt simele sibone ukuthi thina sizazikhulula kanjani umbono wami
siyawuzwa kakhulu ke ubambe khonapho ngakatshana so what she's saying is that Africans know what exactly is pressing them so it's all up to them to come together and sort out all these kind of problems that they're facing.
Which takes us back to the issue of peer review, the peer review mechanism. Mr. Mashiri, what are the prospects that Africans can do it themselves without anyone coming to tell them about democracy?
There are prospects that Africans can do it, not necessarily ignoring some external assistance from the United States and other, democracies. And the prospects are also there because we have good examples like Namibia, which has shown, peaceful transfer of power from one leader to another, including those who were, in the liberation struggle, who have the same justifications for wanting to rule like those for President Mugabe, but they gave way to others. So it shows that peer review can work by way of leaders asking, rather encouraging other fellow leaders to check on their leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Mashiri. Of course, it's important to take advice, as they say. A fly that lacks advice will follow the corpse into the grave. Certainly. We end it there. We want to thank our guest, Mr. Mashiri, an international relations expert and political analyst, Sali Numhle Mlambo of Platform for Youth Development, our callers, those who send messages on Facebook, and WhatsApp, our team behind the scenes, our engineers and producers. Signing off, this is yours truly, Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Kip Stewart saying good night, Zimbabwe.